So I obsess over things. So when it's particularly active, I do a lot of counting, a lot of hand washing, a lot of bargaining. You make pacts with yourself. So if you have to do X, Y, and Z, because if you don't, something awful will happen. So I mentioned it in the chamber. I personally regard it as a gift. I know for many it is a terrible demon that creates huge upset and pain, but I've always said it's made me more empathetic and understanding, having to sort of wrestle with it.
When did you first notice that you had it?
When I was 13, and I had no idea what it was. And really, I don't think I properly worked out what it was until I became a Member of Parliament.
And why? Because you were more grown up and you could...
Because somebody sent me a book on OCD, and I think I recall, I thought, oh my God, I've been found out. You know, they've spotted me on the benches with a tick or something. You get these nervous ticks. That's sort of when I realised what it was. I mean, my family have known I've had it for years, going in and out of rooms 20 times, turning off light switches, washing hands, so on and so forth. But as I say, there are times when it's particularly active and times when it's not. So times when you change, and when there's big change in your life, it becomes very active. So, for example, when I became a Member of Parliament, it sort of went into sort of uber overdrive, and now it's in a calmer phase.
And it's kind of been misunderstood over the years. You know, people use the term OCD quite casually to suggest it refers to people who are obsessive about tidying. That's not what we're talking about here, is it? Just explain how it actually works in your own brain, which...
So, look, I have a mild form of OCD, but there are some people where it is absolutely life-changing. So they might have to blink 1,000 times and they lose count at 998 or something and have to start again. And I mean, there are people with OCD who end up in mental health wards because they require significant interventions. And I have enormous sympathy for them. Luckily, there are treatments that one can undertake that can ease people's symptoms, how it manifests itself. But for people at the extreme end, it is absolutely life-changing. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but likewise, I've learned to live with it. It gives me a degree of insight, I think, to myself and others that I wouldn't have. And I can talk to people with OCD and be empathetic and sympathetic.
And what's the significance of doing things in eights?
It's finding balance. I've always said it's about finding balance. So that's where I'm in equilibrium, if you do something that you find balance.
How was it received when you made the speech in 2012? Because actually, when it comes to acceptance of mental health, a lot's happened in the last decade.
I think it's been extraordinary. What I did was tiny. My colleague Kevan Jones on the Labour benches talked about living with depression, and he's an amazing man. This is something that afflicts lots of people. I'm not at the extreme end. We have to understand that there's a spectrum of mental health illness, and some people suffer with life-changing illnesses. It's like we mustn't say that having a cold as a physical illness is the same as having cancer or heart disease. There is a spectrum. Sure. I remain concerned that if you have a diagnosis of psychosis schizophrenia, it is still the case that your life is shortened on average by 15 to 20 years. So when people say, have we made progress? We will have made progress where that diagnosis does not significantly shorten your life. And we're a long way off from reaching that stage.
Are you concerned about the availability of treatment? Have you sought treatment yourself?
I haven't sought treatment myself. I think undoubtedly mental health services are overstretched. There's a very high demand for them. That demand was accelerated by COVID. And the lockdowns. There's lots of people who are managing a condition, had it under control, be it an eating disorder, be it an anxiety disorder, be it depression, who have coping structures around them. So I have an enormously supportive family and friends. But if you strip away that coping structure, if you remove people from seeing their family, you remove people from seeing their friends, it was the case that for some, the world crowded in on them again. And an illness they had under control suddenly surged back into their lives. And that undoubtedly is placing a pressure on already stretched mental health services.
Was it a sign of the times that perhaps the government did undercook the mental impact of the pandemic? Obviously, lots was made about protecting people and saving the NHS, but it's left a legacy, particularly among younger people, of huge amounts of anxiety, of depression.
They talk about, isn't it? I think it's sort of parity, equality between physical and mental health. I don't think mental health got a look in during the pandemic response. I think some of the stuff around targeted at children, if you go and see your granny, you'll kill her, was simply appalling. I mean, it was absolutely appalling. And people need to be held to account for that. In my view, look, my views on lockdown are not a secret. I spoke against lockdown repeatedly. I warned against its implications. I warned how it would impact people with mental health conditions. I warned how it would change our approach, for example, to civil liberties and protest. And I think in the main, my warnings have been borne out. Obviously, I failed to change the weather while the lockdowns were going on. I entirely agree. The first lockdown of 6 to 7 weeks was necessary. None of us knew what we were facing. But once the information became available that this disease largely targeted the elderly and those with underlying health conditions, we could have done things far more humanely.
Obviously, you've done very well, actually, in your area of Hertfordshire. How bad do you think they were for the Conservatives?
So I'm in South Hertfordshire. I border London, and the M25 is our border. I think the Conservatives could have done worse, and Labour could have done better. It wasn't a great night for the Conservatives by any stretch of the imagination.
But you think they could have done worse?
We could have done worse. We could, and perhaps after the ructions of last October with 3 prime ministers in the space of 50 days, we deserved to do worse. And I think Labour could have done better. Of course, Labour had many successes over the night, and we had many upsets and failures. But I don't think the Conservatives are out of the running come the next general election, which I suspect will be in the autumn of next year. And I'm not standing in that general election.
Yeah, but you're not standing. And tell us why, because that's not exactly a ringing endorsement of the future of Rishi Sunak's government.
That's absolutely not the case, because I announced I was leaving Parliament in February of last year, so February 2022. I felt that I'd done it for 18 years then. No, 17 years then. It looks like I'm going to do it for 19 and a half years. And I've always been clear, you've got to want to be a member of Parliament 100%, 110%. Now, I love being in Parliament and legislating in Parliament, but I'm struggling to bring that same level of energy to my constituency duties. And being a member of Parliament isn't about me, it's about my constituents, and they deserve a shiny new member of Parliament who will be 110% enthusiastic on their behalf. And I think that's really important. We all have a last day in Parliament, well, almost all of us, unless you die in service, but we all have a last day in Parliament. And I don't want to outstay my welcome as far as my constituents are concerned.
But are you also worried about the direction politics is going in?
Members of Parliament try really hard to do the right thing. I think it is often difficult to do the right thing. We have a very demanding audience and we have very demanding constituents. And I just think it's a difficult place. I would find it really difficult now to recommend somebody come here who is succeeding in their 30s and 40s. Say you're a fantastically successful lawyer or accountant. I would say to them, you're going to leave your successful practice to enter the uncertain world of politics. And when you leave politics, it will be very difficult to pick up your career where you left. I think we've professionalised politics, and I think that's a mistake. I think a lot of my colleagues are subjected to unbearable and indefensible levels of abuse by people. Now, most of our constituents are lovely, warm people, whatever their politics, but there is a nasty underbelly in most constituencies of quite thuggish, aggressive people who feel that they can get away with saying what they like and threatening what they like. And actually, that is going to deter further good people from entering politics.
But some of those people presumably are Labour activists.
I think some of them might be. I don't know who they are. I don't look too closely.
I'm thinking about criticisms of Tories has come from the Deputy Labour leader herself. You know, Angela Rayner describing Tories as scum. That can't help the political environment.
It can't. We can all make mistakes, though. What I don't want to do is pile in on Angela or anybody. We can all make mistakes. God knows I've made loads of mistakes in my parliamentary career.
Final question on housing, because I know you've written for Conservative Home. Do you think the Conservatives have built enough housing? I
want to see housing built 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year.
Does that mean you want to concrete over the countryside?
It is a noble... All houses are built on what was once countryside. I mean, there's nonsense that people think that their house wasn't built on what was once a green field, a forest, a meadow. All of our houses are built on countryside. When you move into a community, that does not buy you the right to stop other people moving into that community at a later date. We have to build homes. It's an inescapable fact. And I just get incredibly frustrated by people who've got so much, and they tend to be older people like me, being so ungenerous to the next generation.
But then you're talking about your own NIMBY Tory voters.
Well, in Broxbourne, we didn't seem to suffer from NIMBYism. We returned all our 9 council seats we were defending. We've built houses, we've built flats. We promote the interests of young people in Broxbourne. Look, the young people looking to get on the housing ladder gave up the most during the COVID lockdowns. They were the ones who weren't allowed to go into work. They were the ones who had to stay at home, often working in cramped, rented flats to keep the elderly safe. And just, you're not necessarily rich because you're old, but it is a fact that the older you get, the more likely you are to become a homeowner. And I just think, given the sacrifices our youngsters made during the COVID lockdowns, actually a national drive to give them the homes that they deserve. Yes, we can have people living in social housing association houses. That's fantastic. Those are homes as well. But giving people the opportunity to buy a home, get on the housing ladder, that is fundamentally a Conservative thing to do. And we should be doing it.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.